I just want to render this up in a minute to Subdeacon Maximus, but just to say I'm very happy this is happening. I'm very grateful to Subdeacon Maximus for the work he's put into this. And I think that this is an important subject for us, perhaps more than in other places, but every place should be cognizant of this. It really has struck me how things have changed over the last years since I was younger, which was a long time ago. But the truth of the matter is that for a long time when we were talking about evangelizing, we were talking about the differences and the multitude of different kinds of Protestants. And the number was 35,000 Protestant denominations, which is a very old number. It's much higher now, I'm sure. But the things that have changed, and I think what Max will talk about some, and then later on this evening, has to do with the fact that now every person, every man and woman is their own pope, so to speak. Whether it's a Christian God that they worship or no God at all, they make their own determination. And this is a new landscape. If there are 325 million Americans, I know I'm counting some babies here, there are 325 different perspectives, individual and unique, upon God, upon divinity, upon one's purpose in life. And so this is the challenge that faces us. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm really happy for this. And now I'll let Max take over and do his thing.
Well, first of all, I'd just like to thank everybody for actually coming out, all few of you. I know there's probably way more exciting things to be doing on a Friday night in the great metropolis of Murphy than to be attending a workshop on education and evangelism within the church. The seed for this workshop was planted sometime last year. Actually, last August or so. I was in Pennsylvania as part of the St. Stephen's course. I got to visit Antiochian Village, which was an exciting time. But anyway, in our missions and evangelism class, the priest, Father John Finley, which heads up, as far as I know, in case he's listening to this at some point, pretty sure he headed up basically the missions board of the Archdiocese. And so anyway, he was talking about missions and evangelism in this class, and this bomb dropped on us, all of us there. And the realization that there was such a need to recatechize our own parishes. So you're going in this class thinking, oh, well, we're going to talk about missions. This is cool. We don't hear about missions a whole lot, and evangelism a whole lot in Orthodoxy. So this was kind of exciting. But then the tables kind of turned, and there was a need to recatechize our own parishes. And I never saw such a lively bunch of participants, like just sitting out there. The room practically erupted, like this is a need. I remember writing down in my notes, this has to happen. And like, this is going to probably be my project next year. So I began to think about this over the course of the last 10, 11 months, the intersection of education and evangelism. They're really flip sides of the same coin. If Christians are not at least somewhat educated in the basics of their faith, how can they speak to a culture that could easily pick up their smartphone and Google the answer to their question? Why even engage with us? We have to at least know the basics. And as some of you have probably met people who aren't Christians that know just as much about our faith, or Christianity in general, let's say, or more than some people. I've met people who know more about Christianity than the average Christian I bump into on a regular basis. So the purpose of this workshop is to get us thinking, to get us aware of the interconnectedness between things like doctrine and mission, scripture and instruction, tradition and dialogue. All these things intermesh, and we're going to look at how we can use these things to better dialogue about our faith. One caveat, though, before we continue, it is pretty obvious that I'm not a bishop. I'm neither a priest. I got the fortune of standing up here with a priest, and the deacons usually get to stand because I'm too short for the camera. So this is not delusions of grandeur. I'm not allowed to stand here. And if anyone's watching this video on YouTube, I'm sorry if I look presumptuous, but Father's cool with it. Since he's here, he says, because I'm here, it's okay. But I'm not a bishop. I'm not speaking on behalf of our Holy Orthodox Church. Okay? I've taken stuff I've learned over the years. The realization came just last week or so. I told Emily this, told my wife this, that, like a lot of this has been in a work years before I became Orthodox. Is some of the content in this. Some of this is my own journey mixed in. But so I've just sort of culled a lot from what I've learned over the years. So people much wiser than myself. And if I give an opinion, I'm going to state this is my opinion. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Orthodox Church. And then we're going to talk about some doctrine and that kind of stuff as well. But I simply wish to provide the tools that hopefully will help aid us in a dialogue with a culture, which is radically different than it was when our church was formed. So, I titled the first session, A Post-Christian Condition, A Report on Religion. Father Alexander Schmemann says this: whatever the achievements of the Christian faith in the past, today we've honestly faced a double failure. The failure to achieve any substantial victory over the other great world religions, and the failure to overcome in any significant way the prevailing and growing secularism of our culture. That's why I titled this The Post-Christian Condition. Basically playing off postmodern thinker Lyotard's Postmodern Condition, a report on knowledge. See what I did there? I'm opening this whole workshop based on a report on our current condition. Why is this? Why is this necessary? An account of the state of things and the way they are and our socio-religious landscape is a good place to start before we dive into the details more tomorrow. This is the warm-up. In the beginning of Lyotard's book, published in 1979, because at the Postmodern Condition, he says this: the status of knowledge is altered as societies enter what is known as the post-industrial age, and cultures enter what is known as the postmodern age. What is the nature of this change? What is this alteration of knowledge that he's speaking about? This sort of echoes another thinker we're going to talk about tomorrow named Charles Taylor. He asked a question, is why is it that a person living in the Middle Ages would find it inconceivable to not believe in God, yet a person living in 2019 finds it almost impossible to believe in God? What has changed in reality for this shift to happen? So all this we're going to consider in more detail tomorrow. But for now, we're going to look at some statistics. I don't like statistics, but it's a good way to start off things. Okay? So this condition we've inherited. Our society, quoting another interesting thinker, Douglas Murray, who actually titles himself a Christian atheist, which is actually unusual. But this is a very interesting comment he made in a famous debate between Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris that was online. And if you guys are familiar with them, Jordan Peterson is a very controversial figure now, clinical psychologist, is really in the limelight, debating Sam Harris, which is a famous atheist. Douglas Murray was moderating, and he kind of sits in between them. He's an atheist, but I'm also believe in the value of religion. We can't remove that from society because it keeps a stable foundation. I don't agree with his Christian atheism, but his statement I find is fascinating. Because we may be in the midst of the discovery that the only thing worse than religion is its absence. A new religion is being created as we speak by a new generation of people who think they are non-ideological, very rational, past myth, past story, who think they are better than their ancestors, yet never even bothered to study their ancestors. This is our current condition. Some numbers now. Pew Research doing a study on the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, nuns. From here on out, when I say nuns, that's what I'm referring to till the end of tomorrow. And a study in 2017 is asked the reasons why they are unaffiliated. Okay. First of all, there's also a large percent of people who identify as atheist. And there are those who identify as agnostic. And then there's these other ones, the nuns, they call themselves, that don't affiliate necessarily with anything. They're like, none of the above. They may be agnostic, they may have atheistic leanings, but for the most part, like, we don't really know. We don't affiliate with anything. Okay? Interesting. The ones who tend to lean agnostic say this: 30% of them say the reason why they don't practice religion is that they question too many of the teachings. 17% they just don't believe in God. 14% say the church's stance on political and social issues is why they don't consider themselves religious. 15% think religion is irrelevant. 5% just don't like religious organizations or leaders. And 9% just say they don't have any important reasons whatsoever. Okay, so those are the ones that lean agnostic. And then the ones who are the nothing in particular, they just don't really have any affiliation, they haven't given much thought. There's a large percentage, there's like about a quarter of the population right now within this younger generation that say we don't affiliate with anything. So within that group, some lean one way or another. Some are more atheist, some more agnostic. Some are more like religious, but not spiritual, but not religious. We're going to talk about that later. But within that group, which is fascinating, is that 28% of them say the reason why, they don't really give any real reason why they're not religious. They just don't really care. Moving away from the nuns and into certain social issues, Gallup poll 2018 talking about the difference between pro-choice and pro-life. The 18 to 29 age demographic, 56% are pro-choice. The 30 to 49 is 51% of pro-choice. I left out the older guys. Sorry, guys. As you're going to find later, it's actually pretty much across generational barriers in most of these numbers. Pew Research, talking about same-sex marriage, this is 2019 numbers. 61% of Americans in support of it, 31% oppose it. Pew Research again about religious affiliation, which the numbers are a little different than the last ones I gave you about the nuns. 70.6% identify as Christian. 5.9 is other non-Christian faiths. 22.8 atheists, one of the bigger groups. Agnostic 4%, and the nuns again, they're down here, they're only 15.8. I think this was an older study. What I want to look at, though, is what I find extremely disturbing, is that 70% identifies Christian, yet there's still a very large percentage who, a majority, support things that traditionally the church would never have supported 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Pro-life, pro-choice, the pro-choice issues, and then the same-sex marriage issues. Now, I'm not going to get too hung up on these right now, okay? I'm sure all the droves of people flocking to watch this video later are going to be getting all angry comments on YouTube over this. All like 3 people are going to watch it. But there's a disconnect, a serious disconnect between the historical Christian faith that we consider ourselves the historic Christian faith. There's serious disconnect, obviously, between modern American Christians, or modern Americans in general, and the religious belief, and the disconnect between certain social issues. Okay. I'm going to pick on evangelicals a little bit. And the reason being, I used to be one, so I can make fun of them a little bit. And this is not really poking fun of them, but there are a large percentage of Americans identify as evangelical. So, and there was a study done called The State of Theology in 2018. And I just pulled a few of these, some of these numbers. So they asked doctrinal and theological questions. There's 4 I decided to kind of hone in on. The first one God accepts the worship of all religions, including Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. 51% agree, 42% disagree. This is the one I wanted to pull my hair out when I saw. Jesus is the first and greatest being created by God. 78% agree with that, and 18% disagree. This is why we're talking about education. We don't have that problem in Orthodoxy, as far as I know. The majority of people, especially adults, you catechize, you know Jesus is not the highest created being. That he's God. But that was an alarming number. The third one, religious belief is a matter of personal opinion. It is not about objective truth. 60% agree versus 30% disagree. This is where we get those numbers that Father was talking about earlier. How everyone's sort of basically their own pope. There's a bazillion denominations, which are all very similar, and some drastically different. Everyone's their own pope, basically. Another one, sex outside traditional marriage is a sin. Only 57%, at least it's the majority, but 57% only agree with that. So the rest of them are like, it's fine. Now, there's not a lot of research on Orthodox, but I'm not going to leave us out completely, because we're not immune from some of this stuff. Pew Research, 53% of Orthodox think abortion should be legal in most cases. This is the kind of stuff here, which we're talking about in our class on missions and evangelism, which is a big red flag and why we had to recatechize. We're pretty good here. You guys are pretty good here. I've heard horror stories of elsewhere of what people believe. And the priest's like, you realize we don't teach that. How have you been in this church for 15 years and never heard that before? But same-sex marriage, 54% in favor of it, 41% oppose. I tried to do some digging on more like theological doctrinal statistics for Orthodox. I couldn't really find anything substantial. So those are the only ones I was able to find. The point is, we're not immune from it either. However, we shouldn't be too focused on statistics. They are numbers. They can be misleading. They don't accurately always reflect people. And it's a danger to cram people into these sort of well-demarcated categories. Often people's opinions vary. I mean, and you're stuck at a multiple choice thing, you're just like, this is the one I'm the closest to, and you're just like that. And how many people do they survey? Is it 20 people, or did they survey 1,000 people? And what areas? Politically, across the country, things vary quite a bit, so we're not going to get too hung up on the numbers. Just kind of wanted to paint a picture a little bit here. So the problem, we looked at some numbers. What is this problem which we've inherited culturally? Father John Bayer was asked what the greatest challenge is facing the Orthodox Church in the modern world. And he gave 3 things. 2 are pertinent to us. The first one is the church did not go through modernity, but we did. So we living in the West, specifically America, but even Western Europe, went through the modern age. Went through the age of reason, went through the scientific revolution and all these things. Industrial revolution. So we as human beings went through that. We live in it. Our ancestors went through it. Culturally speaking, we went through it. The Orthodox Church did not. The second one is getting people to be concerned about things beyond this world. We're not going to talk about this one directly, but it's sort of indirectly tomorrow. And the third one, he talks about the jurisdictional mess, which I'm not going to talk about that at all. So we've inherited a world which has been shaped by the scientific, rational worldview. What does this mean? Well, one, we all believe we're self-governing individuals. We're autonomous. We make our own decision. We do what we want. And you can't tell me I'm wrong. America was founded for the most part on this rugged individualism. Another thing is reason and science have basically eradicated religion from the public sphere. Therefore, belief has been relegated to just mere opinion. You believe what you want to when you're at home. Don't bring it into the workplace. I've heard people say, "Don't bring it here." Just at least recently, I was listening to Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he was talking about how it's like, and he's an interesting fellow, being an astrophysicist. He's open to the concept of religion. He just says, "Don't bring it into my science." And this is some of the issues we're going to talk about tomorrow more. We've also inherited classical liberalism, aka capitalism, which has reduced persons to consumers. And our interaction is really nothing more than sort of a transaction with a possible monetary value. Democracy in all of its varied forms has accentuated individualism. It's not always, and it's not a guarantee of equality before the law so much, which is troubling, but it's this idea, we almost get to the point now where we sort of subject the law to the individual with this pretext of majority rule. Not every person's opinion not only matters, but is beyond reproach. Like I said, what's true for me might not be true for you, and that's just the way it is. I'm allowed to believe what I want to believe, and you can't tell me I'm wrong. And this filters into the political realm as well. Another thing we've inherited, human beings have survived through millions of years of natural selection. This strips meaning away from the human person. If we are just a result of struggle and survival, genetic mutations and selection, then we are devoid of any transcendent meaning. Even if they could prove physicalism is true, that meaning can sort of emerge, or the spiritual can emerge out of physicality, it's still arbitrary. It's contingent upon the temporal world, between space, time, and places, etc. Now, I'm not getting into rules of science here. For the most part, when I've come across in Orthodoxy, we don't make any claims against scientific theories. That's where we differ from medieval Catholicism. The only time we tend to have an issue is when you try to extract a philosophical system from the scientific. Like the idea of, I mentioned natural selection. I forget where I read this, so I'm sorry. This just came to mind. We don't have any problems with scientific theory, how we got here for the most part. That's one way of explaining the universe. According to science, okay, maybe evolution is true, whatever. We're not going to worry about it too much. We believe God created everything. Where most Orthodox will stop is when you try to extract the philosophical system from that. So this idea of like science providing meaning to the world. That's what we do. That's what we do. Belief, the church, we teach theology, we teach doctrine, we have our liturgy. All these things provide meaning to our life. Science can explain the physical, but basically keep your science out of my religion at that point. You can't define, you can't, probably start putting like Darwinism into philosophy, we get social Darwinism, which created socialism and all these horrible things. Anyway. If we're reduced to a purely evolutionary worldview, purely evolutionary, take God completely out of the picture, then everything is really just reduced to volition. We get the basic will to power. This is the danger of extracting, like I said, philosophical systems from scientific theory. Technology has only exacerbated the problem of hyperconnectivity. Or with hyperconnectivity, excuse me. Now a world full of neurotic people can be in constant contact with each other. The global village of Marshall McLuhan, who predicted this back in the 60s, has come true. This provides each person the ability to create their own community with very little real obligation to each other. This is what we have with social media. it's a form of community building. I've known some people who pride themselves so much in creating their own community of friends to the extreme where they shunned the things that really should be the most important thing, which is usually family in your religion, in your church. They would reject that as soon as there was a problem. As soon as somebody in church said, well, we don't agree with that, what you're doing. Oh, well, forget you, I'm going to go hang with my little self-community, my self-created friend group. It's a form of community, correct, but it becomes an upside-down form of community. When you really learn to be in community with each other, the ones you're stuck with, you don't have a choice. That's why family is so important. That's why being involved in local parishes is so important. I mean, we all come to worship together, but we learn to be with each other. Problem with social media, it creates this act of self-creation. So we create our online virtual selves for other people to view, but it's not really us. It's a fake, false reality of us. We simultaneously become Frankenstein and the creature. We interact with the other virtual creatures. Philosopher Baudrillard was correct. We enter this period of simulation where the images, he calls it simulacra or simulacra, precedes the real. So we have these images which have been created, and we only interact with those, not the real world anymore, but we believe those are the real thing. His thought was influential in the making of The Matrix. See, that movie, The Matrix, forever ago now. That's a good idea, understanding of his idea. We interact with a world which we think is real, but it's not real. It's an illusion. The problem was most people are going through life participating in a fake world. This is what the internet creates, social media. We live and move and have our being within this hyper-reality, this connection which is not genuine. And the real itself has just become a desert. Liberal arts, rhetoric, classical liberal arts, rhetoric, logic, and grammar are really no longer taught in school. The problem with this is that people are raised in a system that has devalued the ability to truly articulate what you think and unable to dialogue with someone who opposes you. We become overly sensitive, emotional centers of consciousness. And we're married to our ideas of things. Most people cannot separate what they think about something from who they are. So when you get into an argument with somebody, we like to say intense fellowship in Christianity, an intense fellowship with somebody who disagrees with you politically, let's say, or religiously, or whatever, or some of the matters we talked about earlier, and some of the polling. People can't separate themselves from their ideas, so when you discuss an idea with somebody, well, I don't agree with that, they take it as a personal attack, instead of going, oh, they're just challenging what I believe. So instead of being able to defend it, they just attack the other person, and it becomes this sort of emotional, verbal boxing match at this point. And nothing productive comes out of this, nothing. I was listening to a podcast similar to Abbot Trifon, and he talked about this very thing in the morning offering. And he said, and when you get basically just fruitless conversations like that, he says the only ones that win are the demons. We don't win in those things. And unfortunately, I've heard often said that it's the young people who are the snowflakes, the ones that can't take anything, the sensitive ones. But unfortunately, I've seen this rear its ugly head in every generation. It's not just young people. It's just the state of our culture and the way it is now. Yes, some of the younger generations have gotten maybe more distilled because they don't teach this stuff in school anymore, but it goes across generational barriers. So this has been depressing. So we're left with this world which is sort of bereft of the spiritual thanks to science and philosophy. There's no transcendent really anymore. God's presence is seen as more of an absence, or he is pushed to the periphery of things, which is way further than what usually the classical deists have pushed him. At least they admitted he was the first cause of things. God is somewhere out there, and we don't really care about him right now, if we even acknowledge his existence. How we got to this point, we're going to examine more tomorrow morning, which is why we're getting started so early. We need fresh minds in the morning, because we're going to take a little romp from the High Middle Ages to right in the cusp of the postmodern era tomorrow morning. and just go from there. Kind of feel how we got to this point. Why is it that our society believes what it believes? And a lot of Christians are more like this than they realize. But this is when the church enters. We were given the Great Commission. When Christ ascended in glory, which we just celebrated not long ago, he gave us a task. This is to make disciples of all nations and baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit. And 10 days later, the Holy Spirit descended, launching the church into its ministry, which we just celebrated last Sunday, which is why Father and I decided to try to arrange this workshop on this weekend. Pentecost weekend, which would have been too much. But this is the weekend of All Saints, which is the fruition of Pentecost. We've got a job to do. We've done a pretty good job over the centuries. However, of late, things have not been so great. Often the comparison between pre-Christian Rome and our times have been made, and there are some striking similarities. This is the great time for us to really delve into the Apostolic Fathers, the early apologists who wrote and taught during that pre-Christian Rome. And this is a time to revitalize our parishes. Only then can we truly be Christ's body. Only then can we truly fulfill the Great Commission for our time. How you respond to Christ, to his mission, to his gospel, to his instruction, will play a role for the next generation. They are watching you, and they're watching us. The kids in this church are watching us. How you act outside the confines of this temple will matter how others respond to Christ's call. I'm not very good at this myself. I've got a lot of work to do myself. I'm not always the best example. But that's what we're here for, to grow together. There's two brothers I know who were raised Orthodox, and I asked similar questions of them. Okay, they're adults now. Both of them married with, kids. This is sort of a summary of their answers. I didn't ask them specifically the same questions. I kind of wish I did now, but I was assuming one was not necessarily identifying as Orthodox anymore. So I kind of retooled them. But this is the basic idea of their answers. Being raised Orthodox, they both still consider themselves Orthodox, which is good. A lot of times that doesn't happen. It's not uncommon when you hit your 20s, you leave the tradition you grew up in. I did, pretty much, One is more committed than the other, though. But that one married a good Orthodox girl who is a priest's daughter. So, he's doing it right. He's doing well. The other did not. He's a little less frequent with church. He's kind of hit or miss. It's not as much of a drive for him to get there. He says it has to do with work. He said, however, I thought this was interesting. He had said he's been to evangelical churches, but does not have the same holiness. This is the one I thought was the most pertinent to us, though. When asked the biggest obstacle raising kids in the church, the one who is more committed to going, said this, because it might be their own parents. If they don't set a good example by teaching their kids, trying to explain stuff, going to church regularly, it won't really have any effect. Those were his exact words. I know we don't have a lot of children in this church. We do have some, and we're so happy we have them here. Their parents play a big role in their life, but also each one of us do too. We set an example for them. They're the next generation coming up. And they are also potentially the next generation if they stay in the church and raise kids in the church. Unfortunately, the issue a lot of times is the adults. It's us. We need to learn about our faith. We need to be able to teach and live it out as well. What we believe becomes one of the most important things. These teaching and living are the most important things really a mission and a parish, or like in our case, a mission church can do. It has clear effects on the next generation. It clear effects on how we live too. But the issue is, adults, most of the time, we think we know everything we already need to know. So we have nothing else to learn, And the problem is, if our parents like that, that's how the more likely they're going to instill that to their children. Children need to be encouraged to learn. And if they are encouraged to learn as children, and not stifled in any way, they're more likely to become adults who become lifelong learners. It is crucial we cultivate this in the kids. It's one reason why Emily and I started teaching Sunday school. I couldn't stand up here and make that claim without getting involved with the kids more. Catechism is crucial for converts, but learning should not stop there. It should not stop at our baptism and our chrismation. Hence, the importance to re-catechize. This need to revitalize our parishes through the medium of education and with the desire for evangelism, because these things are interlinked. We're going to talk about both of them a lot tomorrow. Is the entire purpose of why we're here today. So next session, tomorrow morning, we're going to start about 9 a.m.-ish with third hour. And then we're going to, like I said, we're going to kind of look through the Middle Ages a little bit. We're going to talk, tomorrow morning is going to be the heaviest one, so that's why it's going to be early. I'm going to try to make it as entertaining as possible. We're going to talk about some philosophical ideas, how they changed, and how they affected our culture now. We're going to look at some shifts in theology and the changes in the conditions of belief, and how we can make that question, how to ask that question, how somebody in the Middle Ages could find it almost inconceivable to not believe in God, and now it's like, it's one choice among many. It's just, it's just as easy as selecting, I'm going to be an atheist, I'm going to be a Christian, or I'm going to be Buddhist, or I'm going to be spiritual. It's kind of weird nebulous spirituality with no foundation. Any of the choices, doesn't matter, because in most people's mind, they're all equal choices nowadays. So we're going to take that little romp through some of the history of ideas, and we're going to end what was called the death of God tomorrow morning before we get into the second session. So, is there any questions or anything before we dismiss? Because that's the warm-up. There is some homework for you guys if you want to do it. I entrusted the sheets to my lovely wife, and she hit him with the kids stuff, I think. It's not really homework. We're going to get in some heavy ideas tomorrow. So it's just kind of a warm-up. If you guys want to look at the questions, kind of get the brain warmed up, it'd be a good idea, but it's not. I mean, we're not going to discuss any of the questions on the Gemara. It's just for kind of a warm up, and get you guys thinking a little bit. So, but any questions or gripes, complaints?